is that liberals and lefties are falling for this propaganda. They're falling into the trap once again. Now, moving on, we have to talk about a thing that is making the rounds across some sectors of social media. There's some misinformation about it. There's some right information about it. There's some stuff that we have to tease out from this. And I want to give it as much clarity and facts that we can about it, as well as to talk about the concerns that I have with what is going on. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, well, I'm talking about the movie The Sound of Freedom. We're going to talk about the movie A Sound of Freedom. So let's get into it. At the end of The Sound of Freedom, the credits roll and the actor Jim Caviezel addresses the camera directly, his face grim. Quote, "I imagine you're feeling sad or overwhelmed or even fearful," he tells the audience. "But living in fear isn't how we solve this problem. The problem, broadly, is child trafficking. And the solution, implied by the plot of The Sound of Freedom, is courageous sting operations targeting groomers and traffickers willing to provide children to rich Americans." The movie is loosely based on the story of the activist Tim Ballard, who started an organization called Operation Underground Railroad, which conducts such sting operations. We will move over now to a clip from CBS News back in 2014, I believe, to talk about this. I might be wrong about the date there. It's not terribly important, but it is well before any of the QAnon stuff that we will get into later. So let's give this a looky-loo.
Last weekend, police broke up a major sex trafficking ring in Colombia, which has become a destination for tourists looking for sex with boys and girls. The police had help from an American who went undercover to rescue the children, and Elaine Quijano met him.
So one thing that should be noted here is that this should have been known to most people that paid attention to news at all since probably 97, 98 at least. I think I remember watching a Dateline episode that went around. This was before Chris Hansen created To Catch a Predator, that went around and tracked people that went from country to country to partake in this evil, disgusting thing. You know, rich businessmen make the best clientels sort of situation. So it should be stated here that this has been a problem for a long time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a giant conspiracy. Let's let it continue though.
Tim Ballard has one mission: to track down child traffickers. 4 months ago, Colombian authorities asked him to investigate a tip that children were being sold there as sex slaves.
Within a half hour, this individual walks up to me, starts asking me what I'm here for, what I want, and within minutes, he says, "Well, I've got kids as young as 11 years old."
Ballard, a former Homeland Security agent, now heads up Operation Underground Railroad, a nonprofit group that rescues trafficked kids. After that first meeting,
so it rescues trafficked kids heavily but it also is about labor as well.
The Colombians asked him to put together a sting.
No men will be in here, only women.
Operation Underground Railroad spent months planning, renting this house, rigging it with hidden cameras to document the crime, coordinating with Colombian authorities, and negotiating with the traffickers.
How they find these.
So this guy's activism is very commendable. I don't think anybody should think otherwise. I don't think they should think of him as like loony or crazy or conspiratorial. The stuff that he's doing very much helps at least some of the kids that are caught up in this evil act. And it's commendable. I don't want anybody to go after him. I don't even want anybody going after the movie or saying that the movie is just bad and it's anything else like that. This is stuff that is very much things that need to happen, and more people like him are doing this all the time. They're also using AI, or not AI, they're using computer generated images, so to like simulate children actually talking and things like that, voice modulations and things like that, to catch people involved in these kind of things. All that work is commendable. The narrative surrounding some of this stuff now, that is an issue, but we'll get into that later.
The kids, they lure them in by pretending to have a modeling agency. They target them at 9 or 10 years old. And they were telling us that about by 11, they're ready for sex. They're ready to be sold.
What is that?
Okay, and anybody that has been in the military in the last 13 years is very much well aware of what he is talking about here. I was in the military, Army, from 2011 to 2018, served 7 years. In 2012, I was stationed in South Korea. South Korea has a huge problem with human trafficking. And the way that they lure women, especially from the Philippines, Thailand, other Southeast Asian countries, the way they lure women in is to be like, oh, you are so beautiful. You are so talented. We saw you singing at the karaoke bar and we just love your look. And we're going to, we're a group of people in South Korea that contracts and sets up idol stars. They're looking for the next big thing from overseas. And we want you to join our team. And they have other women on their team that goes and talks to them, makes it look legit, flies them into South Korea to do these jobs, promises them big things, and it turns out it's all bullshit. And what they're actually doing is taking away their passports, telling them that they're in debt now because they're able to work in South Korea, making a lot more money than they were making to send it back home to family, oftentimes to their own children, because that is a problem. A lot of people go overseas to work because their own countries do not have enough jobs for all the labor that's there. So they go to other countries to do work. And then they're threatened with deportation. They're beaten. They're assaulted by the people there. And then said, if you want to leave, if you want to get out, you have to pay me $4,000. You'll get your passport back. And the way you're going to make your money, because you can't work legally here, is that you're going to have sex with people for money. This was drilled into our heads day one of landing in South Korea. Every single military base had what they called juicy bars in the area. The US military wasn't allowed to just shut these down. And what these places were selling sex, not directly, but sex services for money. So you would go to the bar and you would pay the bartender. And this isn't necessarily illegal. Okay. So not every woman that would work at these juicy bars was necessarily trafficked, but a lot were. Okay. And the way it worked is that you would go and you pay like $30 or like some other kind of absurd amount of money for a drink. The woman would drink and she would give you conversation. Call them host bars across Asia. These things are legal. They're not, and again, they're not they're not necessarily trafficking. You pay for expensive whiskey. You pay $10 for the woman's drink or whatever, and she talks and converses with you, makes you feel good, and that's it. Like, there's no sex being sold, right? But there can be, and in those situations, they're oftentimes victims of human trafficking. So what Tim Ballard is saying, and what he just said, is 100% true. This happens. So yeah, we're gonna let some more of this play out though. It's only about 3 minutes, and I don't think I'm violating anything here because I'm talking enough about it. But if we do end up having to take this video down, we'll put it up somewhere else.
Like looking into that kind of person's eyes.
It's horrifying, and this is why. Because I've got a smile in the face of evil. The table where we're going to do the negotiation.
Less than 24 hours after the operatives landed, the suspected traffickers arrived on the island, and the final deal with the undercover team began.
All right, I think that's enough of this. There's about 2 minutes left on this, but it's going to give it a lot of repetition, and I think everybody gets the point. Also, I want to avoid the YouTube copyright infringements here. We're gonna cut it there. Now, the real life Ballard that we just listened to did stage a sting operation in Colombia that led to the arrest of several human traffickers, as it is depicted in the film Sound of Freedom. But parts of the actual story have been questioned by reporting, including at Vice, which found a pattern of exaggerations and misleading claims by the real Ballard. Again, this is one of those situations, personally, we need to talk about it because it's important for the truth of it. But these operators always exaggerate how they worked. It's just the nature of the game. I don't know why it is. Maybe you start buying into your own mythos a little bit of how many people you rescued or how many bad guys you captured, whatever, right? And when you create a nonprofit, you have to sell that story in order to get the nonprofit to continue to get money to also help these victims. So I don't necessarily think that this is taking away from the good work that he's doing, that he's necessarily outright lying about it nefariously, but these exaggerations are important to point out. I don't think they diminish much of the movie's message, not the narrative surrounding the movie. Get into that again, like I said, later, but it's something that we do have to point out. With that, Vice News reported in 2020 that Operation Underground Railroad's rescue claims contained a pattern of image burnishing and mythology building, a series of exaggerations that are, in the aggregate, quite misleading. Operation Underground Railroad was started by Ballard in 2013, with funding help from Glenn Beck and Beck's listeners. The group became known for striking deals with child traffickers in developing countries and staging secretly recorded raids at the appointed time of the handoff. Ballard and his teams claimed to have rescued 123 victims, 55 of whom were minors, during a series of coordinated stings in Colombia that unfolded during a single day, that were coordinated with Homeland Security investigations. No one questions the importance of keeping children out of sex slavery or Ballard's belief in his Christian mission, but plenty of experts have questioned his tactics, particularly Ballard's choice to turn these raids into what are essentially tourism opportunities for rich tech bros and celebrities longing to feel like heroes. This is problematic. It's still doing good work. Gotta raise money to do these somehow. But this is kind of gross, in my opinion. As Foreign Policy reported, high-dollar donors have been able to either join Ballard's mission or watch them from the comforts of their own home. In other words, live on TV, you're watching us get some child nose out of the way. That's a little gross. That's a little icky. That's ew. That's cringe. Very cringe. Again, doing good work in a cringe way is still doing good work, but this can make maybe some problems down the line. Not saying that he's lying about anything here. Exaggerations are not necessarily outright lies. Okay, they're things that are important to need to point out for truth, and the overall message that he's doing and the overall work that he's doing is not necessarily diminished by these things. But it is cringe to make money, to raise money off of. You can watch it live while we pull up these. It's a bit weird. Smaller donors, for their part, can sign up for text message alerts to learn when children are saved. That's not so bad, I think. It's not as bad as watching it happen or like paying to participate in this thing. To me, the small donors one here is the equivalent of, for just 20 cents a month, you can help save a starving child in Ethiopia, and we'll send you their picture so you know exactly which child you helped fed, and they'll write you a letter. Like, it's that level of cringe. Pretty typical for these kind of things. It's a little bad, but grand scheme of things, I'm hoping I'm making sense. I don't know if I'm making sense. Please tell me if I'm not making sense or if I'm being a little bit too, I don't really care about that too much. Let me know. But yeah, I just don't see this as that of a big deal. It's cringe, but let's continue on though. The broader politics behind the movie are charitably messy, and the heroic storyline is anything but straightforward. What's more, experts in anti-trafficking work have been critical of Operation Underground Railroad's operation. The argument is that these dramatic raids and rescues are not actually effective, or sometimes can even be damaging to the long-term goal of ending human trafficking practices. The bigger problem with the movie, when watched through an uncritical lens, is that it is misleading about the nature and root causes of human trafficking itself. Although the real Ballard does not present the issue in a measured tone, a blog post on Operation Underground Railroad website readily admits that while this type of human trafficking exists, it isn't the majority. They point out that, quote, most trafficking happens through a manipulative grooming process by a person already in the victim's life, rather than through some frightening and sudden abduction. The latter kind does happen, but very rarely. In other words, Taken isn't that real. Now, Vice News reported today that Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad parted ways before the movie premiered. Interesting. I wonder why that happened. Statistics on human trafficking are notoriously difficult to pin down, but the often circulated claim that 800,000 children go missing in the US each year is an extreme exaggeration. Such claims conflate different types of different appearances and confuse reports with crimes. The reality in America is likely around 115 kidnappings a year. But Sound of Freedom doesn't give audiences that context. It starts with a montage of real footage of child abductions and ends with some pretty alarming stats presented in somber text. Human trafficking is a $150 billion a year industry. The US is one of the top destinations for human traffickers and is one of the top consumers for child. There are more humans trapped today in slavery than at any point in human history, including when slavery was legal. Millions of these slaves are children. These numbers do reflect an ugly reality, but they are misleading in the context of the film. The 150 billion refers to profits from all human trafficking, the great majority of which is labor, not sex, and which includes both adults and children. The US is considered one of the top destination points for victims of child trafficking and exploitation per UNICEF, but it's hard to rank nations with any kind of certainty. This is because there are so many factors affecting the gathering of international trafficking data. Similarly, the claims about more humans in slavery than at any point in history is hard to establish and is made more complicated by variations in definitions. Worldwide, there are likely millions of children who exist in slavery, but that slavery can take many horrific forms: forced marriages, armed forces, and forced labor. All kinds of slavery put children at risk of sexual abuse, but the movie portrays the goal of trafficking those millions as explicitly sexual, and it suggests that kids are constantly being shipped between abusers. This does not represent the reality. You might think that mass distributed misinformation about child abductions isn't that serious, but we know that overblown fears of this kind of practice led to widespread paranoia and societal scapegoating. In the 80s and 90s, Satan panic, they're coming for your kids, etc. The producers of Sound of Freedom may be well-intentioned, but they may also know that their film is feeding into a dangerous and deluded mindset that millions of Americans have come to share. Since 2020, panic about children's sexual corruption has become a political boogeyman wielded by politicians, especially on the right. Rolling Stone called Sound of Freedom a QAnon-tinged thriller, a reference to a sprawling conspiracy theory that says that Donald Trump is fighting an elite cabal of satanic, oh no, that sort of biting coverage. The headline called it a superhero movie for dads with brainworms, was broadly reflective of the reviews in left-leaning outlets, while right-wing publications took an altogether different line. Quote, "It's not paranoid or QAnon adjacent to bring much needed attention to horrors that are all too real," wrote the conservative National Review. And they're not necessarily wrong. We'll get into that more later. The idea of that elite cabals of child sex traffickers lurk everywhere is a QAnon idea, but the company behind the film denies it is fueling this conspiracy. Quote, "Anyone who has seen this movie knows it has nothing to do with that conspiracy theory," said Angel Studios president Jordan Harmon. "It's about a man who did something brave." These QAnon references, though, are not entirely spurious. The film's star has talked repeatedly about some of its most bizarre themes. Chavez attended a QAnon-themed conference in 2021 and has appeared on a number of times on Steve Bannon's podcast, recently calling QAnon a good thing. So this is where we're getting to the political narrative surrounding the film. The political narrative surrounding the film is an issue. Again, the film itself, absent this political narrative, is fine. Mostly fine. It has some misrepresentations or some confusing statistics in it. I'm sure the film is fine, okay? The political narrative, though, is not. It is feeding into division and paranoia that is going to get people hurt. And we don't want that. That is why we're pointing this stuff out. That is why we're talking about this on tonight's program. And having the star of the movie explicitly market it on other people's podcasts, especially Steve Bannon, is a problem. And I think that people need to recognize that. I think if you want this movie to be successful and you think it is a good thing, you should be against the politicization of it. The politicization of this film is a problem, and it's causing to have more division happen. And it's something that we shouldn't abide by. And you shouldn't blast people like me for pointing out that, yes, there is a political narrative that is harmful surrounding the film. Even if you want to say the person that wrote it is good, the person that it's about is good, everything else, the political narrative is important to point out and to call out as bullshit. Continuing on, though, using the language of the movement, he warned that a big storm is coming. Again, explicitly QAnon. While the movie doesn't specifically mention QAnon, Chavez has falsely claimed that Ballard rescues children from adrenochroming.
Tim, you're playing the role of Tim Ballard, and Tim is actually continuing to save kids. I mean, you're making a movie about it, but this is what he does, and he
here today. He was supposed to be in the room with me in right here or in Tulsa, but he's down there saving children as we speak, because they're pulling kids out of the darkest recesses of hell right now, in dumbs and all kinds of places. The adrenochroming of children, which
is a fictitious technique in which QAnon believers think children are tortured in satanic rituals. This guy is out there. The director of Sound of Freedom told website Bounding Into Cosmics last month, quote, "I believe if this movie would come out earlier, I don't think the audience was ready." I wonder why you don't think that. Couldn't be that we had a QAnon conspiracy theory going on for 4 years. Continuing on, he quoted to state, well, quote, "Right now, there is advertisement for this film, but on the wrong side. Every day, these atrocities are happening on the news everywhere. Children trafficked. Oh no, children all over the place." Aaron Albright, an attorney who has worked in anti-trafficking space for years, told Rolling Stone, quote, "What they're saying is so divorced from reality that it does sling back to create harm. The narratives perpetuated by the film are dangerous." Quote, "It creates harm when certain policies aren't passed because we think trafficking looks one way and it's actually another. It creates harm when victims don't recognize themselves in these narratives." But wait, there's more. Again, the political narratives here are the problem. The film itself, I'm sure, is fine. I've seen these kind of film elsewhere. I'm probably not going to go see the movie in theaters. I might watch it on streaming. I watch most of my movies on streaming now. Okay, I'm not dissing the film, but the narrative is bad. So we have to continue to talk about it. Now, Sound of Freedom earned $10 million in pre-sale tickets and on its first day of release nearly equaled the box office gross of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. The numbers are astonishing when considering that Sound of Freedom played in 2,000 fewer theaters with only a fraction of the budget and without the backing of a major studio. The box office success has been heralded as a win for conservatives and Christians and a victory against the secular left. In short, for a segment of the US population, the movie is a sensation. Or as Krevels put it in his post-credits message, quote, "I think we can make The Sound of Freedom the Uncle Tom's Cabin of the 21st century." Now this brings up an interesting thing here, is whether or not did Disney kill the film, directly or not. So a viral tweet claimed Disney owned the rights to the film after buying 20th Century Fox Film Studios in 2019, but did not release it. Now, Newsweek, trying to do the thing that they do, which is contact people for comment, reached out to the Walt Disney Company and by email to confirm if it had acquired the rights to the film in 2019. The magazine wanted to clarify that Disney decided not to release the movie, and if so, what the reason was for shelving it. A Disney spokesman told Newsweek an international deal for the film's distribution had already been done prior to its acquisition of 21st Century Fox. The spokesperson said that, quote, "Disney Studios had no specific knowledge of the film, given the nature of the international acquisition pre-merger." The Walt Disney Company announced its acquisition of 21st Century Fox in 2017, and that was completed in 2019. The acquisition meant Disney would automatically acquire the license to 20th Century Fox's film and television studios, cable entertainment news networks, and international TV businesses, and Hulu. One other thing that we should note here is that the producer of the film and the director of the film tried to get the rights to the film back prior to the shelving and had to wait until basically 2021 through legal hurdles and everything else like that to get the rights of the film back. So that belies maybe some of the issues. Disney, 21st Century Fox, could have released the film had they wanted to, but they shelved it for some reason. They didn't obviously the film still got released, so they didn't release it themselves. They sold the rights back to the film producers or just gave it back. I don't know the details of that because I'm not really a movie nerd. So I don't know those details, but the film clearly got released. It took, 4 years to get released. But after a merger and acquisition, there had to be like some sort of, well, we don't want to publish the film because of whatever reason, which they have not disclosed. We don't want to publish the film. Let's negotiate a deal for you to get the rights back. That could take 2 years. So why didn't that happen? I don't know. That's between the lawyers to decide whether or not there's an NDA. I haven't looked up too much into it. All I've seen is that Disney has not said why it wouldn't release the film, which leaves rank speculation to fill in the gaps. Some people, especially those in the QAnon realm and the far right,
think that the Hollywood elites are trying to suppress this movie from going to market.
If that was the case, they wouldn't have sold or given the rights back. They had no obligation to. They had the licensing rights. They could have just sat on them and never did anything with it. There might have been some stipulation if the movie wasn't released within X number of years, then it had to automatically go back, which means that they would make more money by releasing the film potentially than just selling it back because it would automatically go back to the rights holder. I don't know what the contract said. This is just a possibility. But I don't think that it's this elite cabal trying to hide the truth. I think what happened is that Disney didn't want any of the shit around this film that we're seeing happening right now. The film's star is a QAnon conspiracy theorist, or at least playing one up for the crowd. Don't know which one. Both are bad. Okay. There is a large amount of controversy surrounding the film because of that. There was people online, both left and right, politicizing the film over US politics due to the fact that QAnon is a conspiracy theory that has a lot of pull still. A brand like Disney isn't going to want to have to defend some film like that. So they're not going to want to publish it under their brand. That's it. That's the only thing that happened. It's not a conspiracy theory about why this is the case. Another thing that needs to be mentioned here is that the film is doing fairly well, but it's doing fairly well because of activists buying tickets and giving them away for free. Doesn't matter if a theater is full or not if every single ticket is sold, because what they'll report is the box office numbers, and those box office numbers look pretty good when you have conservative activist groups and QAnon people and other narrative building political operatives trying to create a narrative around a film to go against your political enemy that is Disney for some reason now, probably because Disney's no longer a Christian only network or a Christian friendly, explicitly friendly network, to take them down a peg. So they're buying up the tickets, giving them away for free, and people are going to see the movie and being influenced by that. Again, the movie is probably fine. I have nothing against the film whatsoever. If it wasn't for these political narratives, I wouldn't even probably be talking about it, because it's just would have been a blip on the radar, and it's not the first time that these movies have been produced. We had an entire category of Chris Hansen going around and busting pedos. We had that. The movie, to me, isn't like a new concept. It's based, what makes it new is that it's based on something that actually happened. So that's kind of new. But it's not like there's this like giant cabal to like suppress it. But there is a giant cabal trying to artificially promote it by buying the tickets, having these people come talk at Q events, and going online and talking about how liberals want to like suppress the movie by turning off the AC in this theater and we can't watch it or whatever. It's nonsense, and you shouldn't stand for it. If you're a fan of this film, if you're a fan of the kind of thing that this film is trying to do, you should be upset that they are politicizing this narrative as much as they are. And it was politicized before it hit mainstream news. They were promoting it at QAnon events prior to the fact that it was released. It had a built-in audience of those people, and those were the people that were promoting the film everywhere. I found out about this film probably 4 or 5 months ago for being just online and being a loser that's terminally online and likes to read things from every different kind of social media that I can think of. And it's what it is. And the political narrative is dangerous. It's dangerous to victims of trafficking, and it's dangerous to the cohesiveness of the country. Oh, but the other thing that we wanted to say here, that I wanted to say here, is that liberals and lefties are falling for this propaganda. They're falling into the trap once again. And the way they're falling into the trap is that they were not doing what I'm doing. They're not attacking the narrative that is surrounding the film. They are attacking the film and its producer itself, saying that it's made up. Some are saying it's made up bullshit. Some are saying that it is just one giant QAnon conspiracy theory meant to promote a political narrative, and that nobody should believe anything that the film and its advocates say. They are falling into the trap because, as we watched in the beginning of this program when we started to talk about it, this event that this is based on actually happened, more or less. There, again, some exaggerations, not the point. And by attacking the film directly, instead of the narrative surrounding it, instead of the political operatives hijacking the narrative for political ends, they're attacking the film itself, which turns people off and makes us look like, as liberals and lefties, people that want to defend PDFs. So if you're going to attack anything surrounding this movie, please, for the love of fucking God, attack the narrative. Don't attack the film. I know that some of you are probably thinking this is a distinction without a difference, but it is important. You can say, hey, all those tickets that are being sold, a lot of them are bought by a conservative activist group. Isn't that interesting? Why do you think they're doing that? Why would a political group buy tickets to a movie to make it look like it's doing really well? What do they have to gain from it? Are they giving away every single ticket that they buy? Or are most of them not being procured by anybody? Isn't that interesting? Don't you think that that is maybe be a problem? You know damn well that if George Soros was promoting some film about racism in the United States and buying tickets to give away for free, you would have a problem with it. So why don't you have a problem with this? It's the same thing. That's how you attack the narrative going around it. You acknowledge the problem that the movie is actually showing. And if you want to be like us, because you like to be accurate, you can be like, hey, the movie makes some exaggerations. It doesn't really detract from the message, but you should know that. You should know that, hey, you know, kids aren't necessarily, like, kids are kidnapped off the street. That's not mostly how it happens. You can do those things. In fact, I encourage you to do those things. That's why I did those things just now. But then you talk about the narrative. And you say how the narrative is wrong. And you say basically everything I just said. Point to the fact that political operatives have hijacked this issue and are turning it into a political weapon against their opponents. And it's dangerous for the victims of human trafficking.